welcome to our last Summer Science Series presentation for 2020. We are all missing you in person, and I just wanted to give you a little reminder of where we usually are for these presentations. This is our Redwood Hill Preserve, and pretty soon our little owl face will be surrounded by all the fall leaves again. So we are missing you in person, and we hope that we'll get to see you again soon. But thank you to Nina for being so flexible and presenting on Zoom with us tonight. The presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube following the presentation. So you can subscribe there and see all of our new videos just as they come out. Just to get started, if you want to use your chat box and tell us where you're listening in from, we have people from near and far on the call tonight. So we'd love to see where everybody is watching us from. As you do that, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the Indian River Lakes Conservancy. Many of you know us, but in case you don't, we are a donor-supported land trust dedicated to preserving the unique natural character of our beautiful Indian River Lakes region in northern New York State. And so this is a map of our watershed with all of our lakes and the Indian River. And just to the right is where we're located in New York State. Most of our watershed is in Jefferson County, which is highlighted. And since we are a donor-supported land trust, we work off of donations from people like you, memberships, and also just a shout out to our volunteers who give so much to our organization. Our mission is fourfold. We have protection. We support learning and education about nature. We want people to enjoy the Indian River and our beautiful area through recreation, like kayaking, hiking, and through our great trail system that we have. And this is forever, so that means in perpetuity, we want to protect. So upcoming programs, like I said, this is the last of this series, but we always have things going on. Throughout fall, we have a fall hike, and we have some other educational programs that will be going on. So pay us a visit at indianriverlakes.org/events to find out about those and sign up for upcoming events. Tonight, Nina would like to have an interactive presentation, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question and engage. You can also raise your hand if you feel more comfortable doing that, or use your chat box as we go along to ask a question. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Nina Schoch of the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. A little bit about Nina. She is the executive director of the center and has studied loons in New York's Adirondack Park since 1998. She has a veterinarian degree from the Virginia Maryland Regional College of Veterinarian Medicine, a master's degree in natural resources and wildlife management from Humboldt State University, and a bachelor's degree in biology behavioral ecology from Cornell. Dr. Schoch practiced small animal medicine in New York's Adirondack Park from 1991 to 2002 and is a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. She is a member of numerous conservation and wildlife health related organizations and has written many scientific and lay articles. She received the New York State Outdoor Writers Association M. Paul Kiesler New York Outdoor Citizen Award in 2011 and was inducted into the New York State Outdoorsman Hall of Fame in 2014. So many of you know Nina. Without further ado, take it away. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you. Okay. Right. Hopefully this will work. Can everyone see that now? You see the first slide of my show?
Yes.
Yep, good. Okay, so I'm giving a presentation tonight called Conservation Through the Lives of Adirondack Loons. And it's going to talk about the work that we do through the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. We're dedicated to promoting and inspiring passion for the conservation of common loons. And we do that through our research and our education programs in and beyond the Adirondacks. Our work evolved from research that was first conducted in 1998 by Biodiversity Research Institute, and we formed a partnership for several years called the Adirondack Cooperative Loon Program. And over the last 2 decades, it's gone through several iterations. We have now become our own nonprofit called the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. And we've been in existence about 3 years now. And I'm proud to say that we're doing, continuing to grow over time, and things are going well. We're studying loons for a variety of reasons. First off, they're high on the food web, and they eat fish that eat other fish and eat invertebrates and so on down the food web, so that if there's toxins in the food chain, they can accumulate to very high levels in this top predator. And so the loons are reflective of what's going on in the environment. They're also very territorial. They come back to the same spot on the same lake year after year to breed, and they defend that territory from other loons. Can you see this loon doing what's called a penguin dance?
I'm not going to join with
okay,
video.
Yeah.
So this bird is protecting its territory. Some people think that this is a mating dance, but it's actually not. It's a bird that's very upset and trying to chase other birds away, or a predator or a boat that's too close to the chicks for his comfort. They also live 20 to 30 years. So some of the birds that we banned in 1998 and 1999 we're still monitoring, which is really cool because you get to know the individual birds, and some have very different behaviors than others, and so it's quite fun learning individual birds and knowing, you know, how they behave compared to other birds. All these characteristics make them an excellent biological indicator of what's going on in the aquatic food webs. So not only are we learning about loons, but we're also learning about the aquatic ecosystems they inhabit. In New York, there are species of special concern. They aren't threatened, they aren't endangered, but New York State DEC does want to know what's going on in their population. Another reason to study them is because they're a symbol of wild, remote places. People really like loons. Heidi was saying that this is one of the larger presentations that people have given over this summer. And apparently maybe it's because some of you like to learn more about these birds. They're pretty cool birds. And I've been very amazed how many people are drawn to these charismatic birds. They've got great beauty and amazing calls, and people really want to learn more about them. I imagine not very many of you would be listening in tonight if I was talking about leeches. Sorry. but if you want to learn about them, we're happy to talk about those too another day. So there are actually 5 species of loons. Can you see the mouse or not? No. Yes. Okay. So in the Adirondacks, we have the common loon that breeds in the park, and occasionally we have the red-throated loon that migrates through. Very rarely the yellow-billed loon. There's been a couple of those birds that have been seen in the Adirondacks on rare occasions. And further north and west, there's the Pacific loon and the Arctic loon, very far west in Eastern Europe. In Europe, they're known as the Great Northern Diver. That's the common loon one is, and then there's the red-throated diver and the black-throated diver and so on. So all these species breed very far north up into the Arctic Circle, and in some places you can actually have all 5 species at once. The common loon used to range as far south as Pennsylvania, and the range retracted a while back and is slowly starting to expand again. I call them the feathered fish because everything about them is meant to decrease resistance as they go through the water. So you see this bird swimming, his body is streamlined, their bones are dense and heavy, and their legs are actually flattened sideways. They like this way, instead of being round, they're squished. And so they can cut through the water like a knife, and then they open that foot, which is almost as big as my hand, and you can imagine they get a lot of propulsion with 2 feet this big for a 10, 15-pound bird. And if you notice, as the bird swims, hopefully it will run again. Let's see, there it goes. His legs are turned sideways like a frog, and the top part of the leg, the femur, is actually encased in the body. So they really have a lot of trouble walking. They're turned sideways like this, and they can't really step forward. They kind of flop when they're moving on the ground. So if they get trapped on ground, they have a lot of trouble getting airborne because they need to run on the water for about a quarter mile before they can get into flight. They have several different colorations. When they first hatch, they're a black downy puffball. And they, after about a week or two, they turn into a brown down. And then they keep that, that plumage for 7, 8, 9 weeks almost. By the time they're about 9 weeks old, they're getting feathers in, and then they still have the down sticking out. So they look pretty goofy at that point. By the time they're just about 9, 10 weeks old, they have this beautiful gray scaly plumage, and they keep that for 2 to 3 years. And the adults in the winter look a lot like this. So they really blend in a lot into the water in the winter. In the summertime, adult birds, which are at least 2 to 3 years old, take on the black and white plumage that we're used to thinking of as loons. But if you went to the coast in the winter and you saw a loon, this is what you'd see, something that looks like this chick. In all 4 plumages, they're white below and dark above. And that's really good camouflage because a predator from above is going to see dark against dark water, and a predator from below is going to see light against light sky. They have a variety of calls, and you're probably familiar with the whale. Can you hear that? Yep. Thanks, Jerry. So that call is a long-distance communication call between adults. I usually hear it when there's an adult on the water and one is flying over, and the one on the water wants to let the bird in flight know that that territory is taken. The other time I hear it is when there's 2 adults feeding together and one goes down, and or they both go down and one comes up and doesn't know where the other bird is, and it will wail. Sometimes you hear it when there's an eagle flying over, or they do what's called a night chorus. A lot of birds are wailing and just and tremoloing and all, just to let each other know that they're there. Another call people think of with loons is the tremolo. And this is the laughing call of the loon, but it's actually not a laughing call. The birds are upset. Here's a bird that's tremoloing because that photographer was too close to its chick for its comfort. They also tremolo when a boat gets too close, or another loon comes into their territory, or an eagle flies overhead, or something is bothering them. So if you're hearing tremoloing, they're a little upset. If you're hearing yodeling, though, that is what this bird is doing, and that is a male, and only males yodel. Females don't do this call. They do it when they're really upset and defending their territory. I've seen this, in this case, there was an eagle flying overhead, and that's why that bird was doing it. I've seen them do it when they're fighting, and when an airplane flies over an eagle, or when a boat is too close to their chicks for their comfort. Now the call a lot of people haven't heard is the hoot. If you've heard hoots, that means that you aren't disturbing them at all. They're hooting and talking to each other That's the call they do when they're feeding chicks. The chicks will beg, and they're really persistent, and especially as they get older, they'll kind of nonstop pestering the adult, and they'll beat it up almost around the neck and the bill, trying to get the adult to go down and get them fish. And the chick will be going, and then the adult will go down and come up and give a hoot, and then the chick will come over and get the fish. And they also have a variety of calls they do when they're courting. They'll do like a whoo, whoo, whoo call, like a mew call. So a lot of these, there's a lot of variations in all of these. There's 2- and 3-note wails and a variety of tremolos. Each male has its own yodel. So if you're musically inclined, you can really tell the birds apart by their vocalizations. There's a lot of threats that affect loons in their habitats, and I've put several of them up on this page, excuse me, so that you can see the differences or the variety there. And there's a common thread amongst all these, and that is wildlife predation. I'm sorry, is humans. Even with wildlife predation, where there's humans
involved,
there's more opportunistic predators because there's more garbage. So you'll see things like raccoons, an increase in raccoons and gulls and ravens and so on, bears. And so if we're able to decrease the impact we have on the environment, we'll be helping out loons and other wildlife. So, and a lot of the research and the education that we're doing through our work is seeking to address human impacts on the environment to minimize the impacts on the wildlife and the aquatic ecosystems they live in. So one of the major threats that in the past has been a big problem for loons and aquatic ecosystems in the Northeast is mercury. And the primary source of mercury in the Northeast was from coal-fired power plants in the Midwest. And the prevailing winds would blow the mercury from west to east across North America and settle in the deposits in the sediments and so on, and then get incorporated into the food web. Methylmercury is the form that is toxic to the, and it bioaccumulates up the food web. And in the case of loons, males are more affected than females because males are bigger. And in the Adirondacks, the males weigh 10 to 13 pounds, and the females weigh 8 to 10 pounds. It's a neurotoxin, so it changes their behavior. It makes them more lethargic and depressed. What I'm trying to say, so they don't incubate the eggs as well. They don't defend the territory as well. They may not care for chicks as well either. And if a chick is born with high mercury levels, it may not have the energy to back ride on the parents or feed as well. And so it may end up not surviving. So the good, so I've talked a lot about how mercury is a big problem, and it is a problem, huge problem globally. In 2013, there was the Minamata Treaty was signed, an international treaty to decrease mercury pollution worldwide. And in on a national and regional level, and also New York State level, there have been significant efforts to decrease emissions of mercury, as well as acid rain and so on. And so the overall pollution in the Northeast has decreased substantially in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, the current administration is reversing a lot of those regulations. And so some of this may cause a problem in the future. So you can see how mercury impacted loons over time. And this is based on research that BRI did from 1998 on through, I think this was 2010 that this was based on. And they found that birds with 3 parts per million or more in the blood had mercury levels significant enough to decrease their reproductive success. And they also found from west to east across North America that the mercury levels went up. And that, again, was the prevailing winds blowing the mercury from west to east across the states. So, and you can see here in this chart that the males were more affected than females. They had higher levels than females. In the Adirondacks, we have study lakes in every single watershed of the park and in every single county in the park. And we've been studying the birds, as I mentioned, since 1998. Our work is funded through a variety of sources, and we have several partners that are participating with us on this project. The New York State DEC and the Wildlife Conservation Society and Calvin College and Biodiversity Research Institute. And a lot of the Mercury research is funded through NYSERDA. We've been developing what's called a Mercury hazard profile, which is how much mercury is in the birds themselves. And we do this by going out at night and catching the birds. And I'll show you a video later on of how we do that. It's called night lighting. And if you've ever heard about jacking deer, that's essentially what we're doing. We're jacking the loons. We've got special permits from Fish and Wildlife Service and New York State DEC to do this. And we're doing playback techniques. We call in the adults with the chick call, and then we call in the chicks with the adult hoot calls. Hoot, hoot. And the birds will literally get within inches of the boat. And then we can scoop them out of the water with a net. So then, and then once they're in our hands, we do a lot of things with them. We try and work as efficiently as possible. And we place these bands on them. The adults get a variety of bands. They get a USGS numbered band so that each bird has an individual number. And then they get a color combination of bands, and they can have stripes or dots on them. There's another stripe band. And so this bird has a red over orange band on its left foot, and the right foot with band as an adult has a silver band or the aluminum band on it and another color. If it was banded as a juvenile, and we only band the juveniles if they're old enough to wear an adult size band, then we put the silver band on the left just so we know it was banded as a juvenile. And then we take a blood sample to learn more about their exposure to mercury levels, and also to learn about the health of the birds. Here's an example of a bird with a blue dot band and a silver on the right leg. And so we've been archiving these samples and analyzing them and trying to get an assessment of how individual birds, how their health is, and then the health of the population overall. And we hire field staff each summer to monitor the banded birds, and they are looking for if each bird comes back from migration and identifying which bird it is. Here's a yellow stripe over silver on the right leg. And as I mentioned, we want to find out if they come back from migration, green over silver on the right, and this leg is folded up. It's orange over green on the left, and it's landing. They have to belly skid on the water to land. They don't use their feet really to land. They slide in. And then we want to find out if they pair up. Usually they form pairs. The male comes back from migration first, often the day the ice lets out, usually in the third week or so of April, but this year ice let out the second week of April, which was pretty interesting. And then the female comes back a week or two later, and usually they're paired up sometime in May, and they'll often start nesting in late May. Oh, here's an example of what we often see is this little flash of green when we're looking for the band. So you really got to get good at looking at the base of the tail and looking for flashes of color. Then we want to find out if they nest. And they, as I mentioned, they usually start nesting in late May, early June. And if the first nest fails, though, they may nest late. There's the size of the eggs. It's pretty big. And if we're lucky, the birds count them for us. And here's an example of a bird doing that. They usually lay 2 eggs, sometimes 3, very rarely. And they turn them before they settle down and incubate them some more. So if they end up re-nesting or nesting late, they may not, they may start nesting in sometimes as late as mid-July. And incubation is almost a month long, 26 to 28 days. So if they start nesting in early June, or late May, you'll see chicks sometime the 3rd or 4th week of June. But if they don't start nesting until mid-July, it may be as late as mid-August before we see chicks. And the first egg that's laid hatches first. So that chick is a little bit bigger than the other chick, and it will actually beat up the first chick and establish dominance in the first day or two because the first chick wants to get all the food. But usually both chicks end up surviving. They figure out who's dominant, and then the second chick will grow and get food as well as the first one. The chicks are quite capable of flying and caring for themselves by the time they're about 3 months old, somewhere around 11 weeks. But as I mentioned before, they are very big beggars, and they will beg and harass the adult until the adult goes down and gets food. And I think that's why the adults migrate first, because they get tired of the chicks coming in and bothering them. Here's a chick that's as big, if not bigger, than his mom, and he keeps begging her, and he wants her to go down and get the little tidbits for him. So one goal of our studies is to learn how many chicks survive to fledging, and this is what a juvenile looks like when it's capable of flying. Its wings are fully grown out, and it's stretching right there. We also did a mercury exposure profile, which is looking at how much mercury is in the water and the food web that the birds are exposed to. So we took water samples and sediment samples and plankton samples, and then crayfish and fish samples of the size of fish that loons would eat. And we learned that indeed mercury levels increased as you went up the food web. And so based on, I think this was about 300 samples from 98 to 2007, we found that 21% of the males and 8% of the females at the time had mercury levels high enough to impact their reproductive success. Now, a lot has changed since then. We've sampled more birds, and the mercury emissions have decreased substantially. So we're going to be this winter, hopefully, reanalyzing the data in the same manner and looking at how that has changed over time. What we found is that at that point, both low and high mercury birds nested about the same, but the low mercury birds were hatching more chicks. And the chicks survived about the same. So the overall productivity, the chicks that survived versus the chicks that died, for the low mercury birds was higher, significantly higher than for the high mercury birds. And that was driven by the hatching success. And we also found that on acidic lakes, pHs of 5 and 6, that the mercury levels were much higher for both female and male birds. And that was because there's a bacteria in the acidic lakes that converts elemental mercury to methyl mercury at a higher rate. So there's higher exposure to mercury on acidic lakes. And we did a little bit of analysis using GIS. We found that on the western part and the southwestern part of the park, there were generally higher levels of mercury than on the eastern part of the park and the central part. And that was because, for those of you that live on the western part of the park, you know that there's a lot more snow deposition in the winter because of lake effect snows. And so there's more exposure there, more deposition of mercury at that point. So we did another analysis pretty recently, and we found that up through 2010, the mercury levels in the birds were increasing, gradually increasing. At 2010, things started to plateau out, which was very interesting. And that is about when the emission regulations took effect, both and really had a significant drop in the deposition of lake acidity or acids and mercury throughout the Northeast. And so this is an indication that we're starting to see improvement in the loons in their mercury exposure, which is great. And then we looked at temporal trends in some of the lakes where we've sampled more than once. And here's a lake that was extremely acidic, and the mercury levels dropped quite significantly in a little bit over almost 10 years' time, which was great. So we had about 10% of lakes had an increasing trend in mercury, and 4% had a decreasing trend. But the lakes that had the decreasing trend was a significant decrease in that it was a huge drop whereas the increasing trend was a much smaller increase. So we take what we're learning and we provide that information to policymakers, both on the state and regional levels. And Biodiversity Research Institute has also brought that information on a global scale to present it as part of the Minamata Convention and the treaty there. So that, and a lot of effort has been done throughout the world, like I said, to decrease mercury emissions and mercury pollution and exposure, both among humans and wildlife, because it was a significant problem. We also take what we're learning and informing the public, and we have these, what I call science summary reports that we put out, and these are available on our website if you're interested. And they summarize the scientific literature, which I actually find rather boring to read because it's very dry and highly oriented toward numbers, statistics. But here, these reports summarize what we've learned and help quite a bit translate the results of our science to levels that everyone can understand. Another project that we did a while back is trying to figure out where loons went, Adirondack loons went in the winter. And for some reason, they don't like to live here in the park because apparently they have to live in these ice palaces and dig down through the lakes to get their fish. But when they go to the coast, they're exposed to things like oil spills or botulism type E. If they migrate through the Great Lakes, almost every year there's been an outbreak there where thousands of birds, both loons and other fishing birds, have died from eating tainted fish, poisoned fish. And then they also are a bycatch species in commercial fishing. I don't have any pictures of that. This is an example of a fishing line loon, but they are definitely one of the species that are commonly caught in gill nets and so on along the coast. So we partnered with USGS to learn more about where Adirondack loons migrate to. And we did that by placing satellite transmitters in some of the birds. This was surgically done. And this is what they looked like when they had the antennas. One of our field staff called them the remote control birds. And we did this on just a very few birds in the Adirondacks, but they told us a lot of information. Here's this bird that received his transmitter on August 20th and stayed on his breeding lake through November 14th. These two birds were females, and they stayed on their lake through mid-November also. Then November 16th, he was off the coast of Long Island, and November 19th off the coast of New Jersey, and he stayed there through mid-January. These two birds went off to the coast of Maine, much shorter migration, and the Maine birds tend to be bigger than the Adirondack birds because they don't have to migrate as far. And that's in general true, where the further the loons have to migrate, the smaller the birds are. And the transmitter signaled every 2 to 3 days for an 8 to 10 hour period. And here he is, April 12th, he's still on his wintering grounds. The red bird here, April 11th, still off the coast of Maine. The blue bird, unfortunately, the transmitter failed and the battery failed. We did not get a mortality signal, so we're pretty certain the bird lived, but the battery didn't make it. Then here he is, April 19th, back off of Long Island, and April 21st, back on his breeding lake. And then the female loon, April 29th, still off the coast of Maine. May 1st, starting to move in, and she took almost a week longer, 2 weeks longer than the male, actually, to get back to her breeding lake. And, you know, being a true scientist, I was curious as to why that happened. So I decided to go up to southern Maine and explore, and we discovered that she was shopping her way back with all the outlet stores. So there you go. The loons like to stock up for the summer too. And here he is the day we recaptured him. And took his transmitter off. He was raising a chick with his female and continued to do so the rest of that summer, and then presumably went back to New Jersey again the following winter and spent the winter there. Now, we're quite curious if juvenile loons had a similar migratory pattern to adults. And based on a huge sample size of one juvenile, we think they have a different migratory pattern, and it's a learned behavior. This juvenile, we put the transmitter on August 21st, the day after the male. And here's the male, the yellow. He did the beeline to the coast. And the juvenile, however, did this little tour of New York lakes, taking a good 2 months to get to the coast of Long Island, 2 months longer than the adult. And so we think that migration in loons is a learned behavior. And once they learn it, though, they make a beeline to the coast and get there as fast as they can. Here's an example of a loon or two loons in flight. You can see they are powering their way. They don't do any soaring like hawks and eagles or turkey vultures. They are flying the whole time nonstop. So migration in loons must be extremely exhausting. And here's an example of one of our birds that migrated to the coast. November 2nd, she had gone back and forth to Lake Champlain, and November 2nd, we had a record signal from her on Champlain, and then November 5th, the next time we had a signal, she was migrating, 10:49 in the morning, and somewhere along that way, she probably started. By 4:15 that afternoon, she was off the coast of Cape Cod. And so that's less than an 8-hour flight. It's pretty amazing. And then over the winter, the course of the winter, she moved over to Buzzards Bay and spent some of the time there. May 6th, she went up somewhere in Massachusetts, and May 9th, 8:23 in the morning, got the first signal. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, she was back on her breeding lake. So that was pretty interesting. It's amazing how fast they can fly and for how long. I can't imagine. Well, I know there's these long distance runners out there, but flying nonstop for 8 hours, that's a long time. And here's what she looked like the day after, 2 days after she came back from migration. She has a totally new plumage, nice breeding plumage. Her antenna's a little worse for wear. And we tried to catch her, like we caught the male, for a couple years afterwards, and she never let us recatch her. But then we found her on a small lake a couple years later, and she no longer had the transmitter, the antenna on, but we were able to recatch her, and we placed a geolocator on her, which goes on the band, and then we had to catch her again the following year, and we discovered the geolocator collects data, a Latin long data, and then you have to download it. You recatch the bird a year later and download it, and then you find out that they went back to the same wintering area. So, and it was pretty interesting because this was a satellite transmitted bird, so we had 2 years of wintering data, and it indicated that she went back to the same area in the winter. So they set up summer territories and they set up winter territories too. Another one of our studies is looking at the population overall, and I think several of you participate in this study. It's a citizen science project, and it's to find out how many loons, how the population of loons across New York is doing. It doesn't, not just the Adirondacks. There are a lot of people in the St. Lawrence River with the Thousand Islands Land Trust helping us too, and elsewhere in New York State. And I'm trying to get a snapshot. It's a 1 hour time period on the 3rd Saturday in July, and try to get a snapshot of the loon population and how it changes over time. So now we have almost 20 years of data, and you can find the results of this data. We have over 500 people that participate each year. Find the results on our website, and also we have a map, AdirondackAtlas.org/ADKLoon, where you can click on a lake and find out what's been observed every year for that particular lake. We've also been looking at nesting success in the birds, and we do this using trail cameras, and it's brought some really cool insights into their incubation behavior, and also the visitors they have next to the nests. So for example, here's a loon with 3 eggs. Here's a banded loon that just hatched a chick and is up there incubating, about to incubate the 2nd egg and have that chick hatch also. Here's a beaver that came up on the nest at night, and apparently the loon didn't seem to care too much about that. and nor did it care so much about the heron that went by. But last summer, or no, 2 summers ago, we found out that bears apparently like loon omelets, and on 2 of our nests, we had a visitor and demolished the eggs in no time flat. So that was something that we hadn't expected. Sometimes we have eggs just disappear, and we assume it's some sort of predator, but we didn't know until we set up these trail cams that the bears were causing the problem, or causing some of the problem. Another issue that we have seen on several occasions is water level rise. Climate change has caused a lot of torrential rains, and for example, in 2015, we had over 10.5 inches of rain come down in over a period of 3 weeks, right in the middle of loon nesting season. And here is a nest on June 22nd at 6:11 p.m. And on the 23rd, we got over 1.5 inches of rain. And this is what it looked like at 6 in the morning, so 12 hours later. And by that afternoon, it was gone. The nest was completely flooded out. And this is another example, same year. Here's the nest and bird incubating with this nest up relatively high, but after the 23rd of June, that's what the nest looked like. So it got pretty well flooded out, the water level rise. We also found that humans apparently really like to look at loons on nests, and this was a campground lake, and this was the very first year that we put the cameras out, and we only had, I think, 3 cameras that year that we had put out, and based on these photos, we worked with DEC, and as a result, we now have buoys and signs that we can place on near nest sites that are causing, getting too much human disturbance. So hopefully that keeps people away from that area. We also have seen a steady increase in the number of loons that are tangled in fishing line. When I first started working with loons, we might get a call once or twice a year about a loon tangled in fishing line. But over time, we now get probably 5 to 10 calls a year that we have to go rescue birds with fishing line attached. And we also get a lot of calls from people that are concerned about a bird that's possibly caught in fishing line, but it ends up usually being a bird that's taking a bath and they just don't know. But if you do see a loon with fishing line or hooks attached, definitely give us a call because we will try to rescue it. They don't always let us do it, and sometimes they manage to break free. This is a banded bird that was incubating an egg, and at 6 o'clock that evening, we got these pictures, and then we went out that night at around 8:30 as it got dusk to try and catch him, and he would not let us catch him. And because he was banded, we were able to monitor him, and we did document that he was able to eventually lose all this line, and he did survive that summer. So some of our work now is actually rescuing loons in need, and most of them are fishing line birds. Occasionally we have birds that get iced in, like this juvenile that just didn't know it was supposed to fly. And then sometimes they're both, where this was a bird that had a lure attached to its wing and we could not catch it in the summer. It kept evading our efforts. And so we decided to wait until it iced in, and then we were able to catch it and took the lure off its wing and sent it in for wildlife rehab, and it eventually got released. But because of those birds, we have started a fishing line recycling program, and we now have recycling containers and brochures. If anybody is interested in hosting one of these, we provide them free to lake associations and other interested groups. So hopefully they sponsor these fishing line recycling tubes and clean them out regularly. And they have really helped. My husband's removed quite a bit of line from several containers this summer. And it really reduces the amount of line out there that wildlife can get exposed to. Some of the other things we do are place these help protect loon signs at boat launches. And we do a variety of public presentations, as you see. We have a newsletter that comes out a couple times a year. And if you're interested in receiving the newsletter, please email us at info@adkloon.org. And there's the website right there, or the email. And we're happy to add you to the mailing list. So people want to know how they can help loons. And basically, on the water, it's common sense. If you're an angler, please fish responsibly. Use non-lead fishing tackle and collect any fishing line that you have. And if you're just out on the water, learn their behaviors and you know, watch them from a distance. If they come to you, that's fine. But if they're constantly moving away, and especially if they're tremoloing or wailing or something, that means they're upset. So it's really important to know when it's okay to approach and when it's not. If they're hooting and all, you can drift with them. But if they're tremoloing, definitely move away. And this is an example of a bird that was very upset, even though it's not calling. I was away the week that this picture was taken. My husband sent me an email saying, we got a call about a dead loon. What do you want me to do? So I said, well, go out and collect it and we'll send it down to the wildlife pathology unit. And the next day I get an email back from him with this photo attached, and it said, dead loon lives. And this bird was incubating eggs, and it was in a hangover position trying to hide. It's basically telling you the same thing the penguin dance was telling you, which is to stay away. But the people didn't know that, and the bird wasn't moving because it was trying to hide. Luckily, it was a sticker, and it stuck to the nest instead of startling off the nest and kicking out the eggs. So if you see a bird doing this hangover, that means that you're too close for its comfort, and it wants you to move away. Also, especially if you're out in a motorboat during chick rearing season, keep an eye out for those chicks because they can't move away as fast as the adults. And we have gotten several reports of both adults actually and chicks getting hit by boat propellers. So really important to keep an eye out for the birds when you're out in the motorboat. On land, the best thing you can do for loons is conserving energy and decreasing the emissions and the amount of trash you produce, amount of pollution. Because what we do impacts both the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystems where we live and the loons live. And by decreasing our pollution, we really help minimize the impacts on wildlife and the habitats they live in. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can help loons, we've started this Loon-Friendly Lake Certification Program this year, and we hope that people in your area, lake associations in your area will join this new program. It's our community-based environmental stewardship program. So we have a lot of different projects that people can do to help loons, cleaning up the lakes, protecting their nests, monitoring the birds, and helping with our education and increasing awareness about wildlife and aquatic ecosystems. So definitely feel free to contact us to learn more about this, and we have this information up on our website too. And with that, I'd like to show you a movie of how we catch the loons and process them for the sampling and banding field work. This film was made in, it'll start, there it goes, in 1999 on Arbutus Lake in Newcomb. And when we go out to catch the birds, we have 3 people in a boat. We either go out in motorboats or canoes. We have a boat driver, a lighter, and a netter. And if we're in a canoe, you can see this was the Adirondack Cooperative Loon Program at the time. If we're in a canoe, you can imagine it's a little tricky when you have 3 adult humans in the canoe and then an adult loon coming over the side. But so far, we've been pretty lucky and we have not completely swamped a canoe yet, which, thank goodness. Takes a lot of balance. So we're shining the big spotlights, and there's, as you can see, the big light. And we're playing the chick calls to attract the adults in and the hoot calls to attract the chicks. And there's the chick in the light. The adult. And there's the size net we use. It's a big salmon net, and it has a very long handle. There's the adult in the light. And they're just magnificent as they approach the boat. The chick is getting caught there. They almost glow in the light. The chick is about 5 or 6 weeks old. It's in the brown downy stage at that point. And we usually cover their heads to keep them calm. Most wildlife calms down a lot when their heads are covered. You can hear the little chick calling. And we take a blood sample from the birds in that chick. You can see, we draw the blood sample from the leg. You can see his foot is already pretty big for the size of the chick. The wings are very small, but the foot grows first. Feet grow first. There's the adult male. And here he is measuring the leg. And you can also see how flat the leg is. Again, it cuts through that water like a knife. We fit the bands to the birds. So we want to make sure we have the leg measurement before we choose the band so that we can fit the band appropriately. And here he is getting the plastic bands picked out. And the chick is getting weighed there. We don't band the chicks unless they're in juvenile plumage already and they have feet the size of an adult, because we don't want to have a chick outgrow a band. And here he is taking a feather sample. We take a feather sample from each wing, also looking at mercury and the size of the feathers and so on. And again, this film was shot on Arbutus Lake in Newcomb, and which is owned by SUNY ESF. And so we had a lot of students and teachers on shore monitoring, watching us process the birds. Here the adult loon is getting its bill measured. We also, as I mentioned, measure the legs and the bills. We can tell males from females based on the size of their legs and their bills. And this is something we don't normally do. We don't normally uncover the adult's head until it's actually touching the water, because we don't want an adult bird to attack us. That bill could be pretty dangerous. But luckily, he liked being a movie star, so he was being pretty good. And here he is drifting off. You can see his bands as he drifts off. It's orange over silver, orange over yellow on the left leg, and silver and green dot on the right leg. And the chick is being taken back out to where the adult female was. And then we send somebody out the next day to make sure that they're all together. And then they're monitored on a weekly basis after that. Oops. So as you can imagine, all this work takes a lot of funding. And so a lot of my work during the winter months is fundraising. And we receive a lot of support through a variety of foundations and individual donors. And it makes a huge difference in the ability to do our work. We also have a lot of, in-kind support from numerous organizations and landowners who help us conduct the research and provide in-kind support in a variety of different ways. So we welcome you to come visit our nest, which is our Loon Center in Saranae Lake. Or if you prefer, to visit us online at adkloon.org. So feel free, I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Heidi, if you want to lead off with any questions that have occurred.
Well, I have one here.
Okay.
One question I gathered from your presentation that the juveniles are separated from the adults during migration. I wondered if those juveniles attempt to return to the lake where they started, or if they are driven off by the adults, or what?
That's a great question. So the juveniles stay on the coast for 2 to 3 years, and they come back to the same area where they hatched, but they don't necessarily come back to the same lake. And some of the banded juveniles we've had have ended up setting up territories about 20 miles away from the lakes where they hatched. So sometimes it's because that's the only territory they can find, or maybe they did try to come back to their natal lake, I'm not sure. But the adults usually stay on their natal lake as long as they can. They do occasionally switch mates. They don't mate for life. But we have, as the population has grown in the last 20 to 30 years, we have seen more and more loon-loon interaction and fights, and adults coming in and killing chicks. One of our field staff this summer was watching from shore an adult and a chick in the center of the lake. The adult bird wandered off to go get some fish, and another adult came out, sat with the chick for a while, and then all of a sudden started killing it and killed it. And then an eagle came in and took the chick away. So an eagle must have been watching the whole time. But usually we think it's the eagle that kills the chick, but sometimes maybe it's another loon. So I think that there's loons coming in and trying to take over territories, and we're seeing a lot more of that now.
Does their territory usually incorporate an entire lake so they don't allow any other loons anywhere on the lake?
No, it depends on the size and shape of the lake. So on a small lake, the minimum lake size they say that loons can breed on is 25 acres, but there have been reports of loons being on smaller lakes. And when it's on a small lake, they often set up a multi-lake territory where they go back and forth to more than one lake, and then they have the nest site. If it's a lake that's in the, 100-acre range, there might just be one pair per lake, and that's sufficient. And then larger lakes, like Cranberry Lake and so on, will have multiple territories. Cranberry, I think, has 10 or 12 territories. So it just depends on the size and the shape.
I'm curious how big a fish they can take.
So that's a good question too. Usually they eat small fish. They catch whatever they want. They're opportunistic feeders, so they'll catch crayfish and so on. They feed the chicks little fish. One time this summer I saw an adult coming in with a fish that was bigger than the chick, and the poor chick was trying to grab it, but there was no way it could eat it. But occasionally an adult loon will catch a pretty big fish, and it will take a long time for them to subdue it and kill it. And then they swallow it whole, and they'll sit there for a long time with a bulge out their neck. Their neck just kind of looks huge until it slowly digests into the stomach. But that probably only happens once every couple weeks, I would say, for an adult.
Is there a way to tell the males from the females just by looking at them?
Not really. The males are bigger. So if you have two different sized birds, if they're both black and white, then the bigger one is the male. And then the males will yodel too. So if you have a bird that's really upset and yodeling, that's going to be a male. The other way, of course, is that the females lay eggs. The males don't do that.
Nina, can we try for the sounds again? Because I think we didn't hear them the first time. I think because your microphone, so if you held your microphone closer to the
okay.
computer, then I think we can get them.
I can also try unplugging. Hold on. Back. I'll try unplugging the headphones. I put them in because that way you wouldn't hear the dog barking and so on.
We could hear it a little bit, but it was really quiet.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Microphone, I'm unhooked now. Here's the whale. Can you hear that better now?
Yes,
Oh yeah,
thank you.
can hear it well.
Good. All right. And the tremolo? The yodel? And again, that's what this bird is doing. Sometimes you can get several birds calling all at once. They do what people call the night chorus, where there's birds on one lake calling and another lake calling, and it's really cool. You'll get coyotes howling and barred owls calling. It's a really neat experience. The hoot. And again, there's lots of variations on all of these. And then the chick begging call. So just like people, there's a variety of different sounds that you get.
Did you say only the males tremolo?
Only the males yodel.
Oh, yodel. Okay.
The females also tremolo and wail and hoot.
We had a couple of questions in the chat box too, Nina. One was about which lakes are more acidic and what is the quality of the upper Saranac
Of Upper Saranac Lake?
in terms of mercury and acidity?
Okay, I think I stopped sharing. Yep, so I could see the chat box again. There it is. Okay, so, all right. Okay, so the lakes in general that were more acidic were the lakes in the southwest part of the park, but there are also some others, such as Cranberry Lake and Silver Lake in that area, which were very acidic and had high mercury levels. Now, this was based in the 1980s on the survey that the Adirondack Lake Survey Corporation did, AOSC. And if you go to their website, I think it's AdirondackLakeSurvey.org, you can look up individual lakes. They looked at over 1,400 lakes and checked the acidity and so on, and chemical characteristics of those lakes. They've continued to monitor, I think, about 50 lakes over time, the long-term monitoring set. I know Big Moose and Ferris Lake and a few others down that way had really high mercury levels and were very acidic. And they have improved substantially in the last 20 years, so that now they're supporting fish and they're supporting loons, whereas they never were able to do that before. On Upper Saranac, I think that the mercury levels have never had a problem there. And then I'm not sure about the lake acidity, but it was never significant like on Big Moose Lake, further south and west. So there is a group called the Adirondack Watershed Institute now that is doing a lot of the water quality monitoring on Upper Saranac and elsewhere. So, yep.
I grew up in Liverpool, but we've long gone up to Millsite Lake up in Redwood area. When I was growing up in Liverpool back in the 50s, the lake there was so polluted from solvay process and that kind of stuff. It was one of the first 10 Mercury Superfund sites. I assume that mercury ends up in all of the sludge at the bottom of the lake, and it may never be suitable for loons.
Right. Unfortunately, mercury is an element and it does not degrade. And so once it's in the sediments, it's in the sediments. And if it gets stirred up, it can, and the chemical conditions are right, it can convert to methyl mercury and get up the food web again. So it depends on, if it's just sitting in the sediments and that are not, the proper chemical conditions are not correct, then it'll just stay there. It's kind of like the lead in the pipes in Flint, Michigan, when they changed I think they put water softeners in the water, and then the lead started to leach out, and then people started getting sick from lead poisoning.
Yeah, I think they put phosphate in their water so that it would combine with the lead.
Right.
Yeah, and coat the pipes. I'm curious whether anybody's ever tried to do sulfide treatment of mercury in a lake or something like that. Because if you had sulfide in there, it would form mercury sulfide, which is very insoluble.
Yeah. I don't think that anybody's done that on a large scale. I've never heard of that happening. I know I've heard of liming smaller lakes for the acids, but not of sulfides for the mercury. That's a good question.
I'm a chemist.
Yeah, good. I gathered that. So, so Wiley wanted to ask about the loon rafts. So that's a pretty controversial subject. There are a variety of plans out there for building nest rafts. And in the past, back in the 70s, when the loon populations were pretty low, that was a useful management tool to increase the population of loons in certain areas. In the Adirondacks in general, we have enough natural nest sites that it's not a concern, except that if there's a lot of water level fluctuation for year after year after year, then the nests are failing due to water level rise or water level fall, then we might recommend a nest raft. The problem with introducing them is that, especially now with the loon population so high, is that you often end up adding a territory where there wasn't one before, and you end up with loon-loon interaction. And so you might have the loons killing a resident loon or killing a chick or chicks. So it can actually cause a problem with that. Wiley, it's a subject that, you know, in the past, I've just talked about, but this fall we're going to be putting some information about it and some articles up on our website, and I can email you that information later so that it'll be more accessible and people can decide on their own if they want to place a raft or not. And in New York, I'm working with DEC on some guidelines on when a raft should be placed and when it shouldn't. So. Okay, so Terry wanted to know if there was a volunteer group or a monitoring group. At this point, we don't yet, but we would definitely welcome the Schroon Lake Association to help them participate in the lake certification program and get involved that way.
Thank you.
So, yep, sure, Terry. And a female makes a call. She does a tremolo or a wail if she's trying to alert the male to danger. And there's a variety of different tremolos. There's a flight tremolo that's pretty high pitched and rapid, and then the alarm tremolo is very repetitive, and so both females and males will make that, and the males also will yodel, as I've said before. Yep. Okay. Anything else?
A question on Millsite Lake, at least, quite often you hear these calls late at night. I kind of wonder what the heck is causing all of that.
Well, one of my first memories of camping in the Adirondacks is about 2 in the morning, looking out the tent and seeing it raining, and then hearing the barred owls and the coyotes calling, and then the loons started in too. So it may be in response to that. I'm not sure, because you know they don't always sleep at night. They just drift on the water. So I don't know. And go ahead.
How about mink and loons?
So mink are a big problem with eggs. They will go in and roll an egg out of the nest and steal eggs. And we've tracked that with the trail cameras primarily. And somebody else had a question about the impact of cormorants. Cormorants are not really a threat to loons. They usually eat smaller fish than loons. They actually can be quite useful on areas where there's a lot of alewives, because cormorants will eat alewives. And they nest in a very different type of environment. They nest in colonies, and those don't usually impact the loons at all. So, All right. Yes, I heard a black fly year is bad for loons, and that is especially bad when the loons are nesting, incubating, because their heads are completely surrounded with black flies. So they can cause cause a nest to fail because the loons just get tired of being eaten up. So a bad black fly year can impact nesting success.
We have one pair of loons on Clear Lake, but on occasion I'll see maybe 6 or 8 of them kind of come in for the day, and they're all swimming together. Is that some sort of family reunion or something?
It's their cocktail party. So these birds are actually very social, and when they're breeding and nesting and raising chicks, they are focused on that, but they really do like to get together and have cocktails. They'll gather in groups of 6, 8, 10 loons in the fall. They'll gather up like on Lake Clear and 60, 80 birds or 100, and before they migrate. And I've seen banded loons go off and leave the mate with newly hatched chicks and go socialize with 4 or 5 other loons and then come back later and feed, care with the chick. So, and sometimes by the end of the field season, one parent is being left with the chick the whole time, usually the male, while the female goes off and socializes. So it's pretty interesting. Last winter, before COVID, I had the opportunity to go down to South Carolina. There's a lake there called Lake Tracassie. And the loons there winter in a group of about 100 to 150 birds. If you go to our website, under research, Lake Tracassie wintering research, you'll see some of the pictures of them. They've got a variety of feeding patterns where sometimes birds will hunt singly and catch individual fish, whereas other times they'll get a group of 20, 30 birds all hunting together, kind of like a bubble netting system with the whales, and they'll go after these balls of bait fish and are hunting very, very shallowly, I can't say the word, in the shallows, and just barely under the water, and the fish are jumping out of the water, and kingfishers are coming in, gulls are coming in, the loons are just catching fish up in the air. It's really cool. It's amazing. And Suzanne talked about the circle dance. This is something that the loons do. I think the circle dance is when the birds gather in a circle and they go, whoop, 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 and they're hooting and diving down under. And it may be a feeding strategy. It may also be kind of a display that they're doing. I see and sometimes I've seen them feeding together calmly, and then all of a sudden 2 birds will start penguin dancing at each other. I don't know what causes that. You know, maybe somebody said something that they shouldn't have to the other loon. So.
Terry has her hand up. Terry, did you want to ask your question? Oh, maybe she didn't. Terry, did you have a question?
It was answered when I put my hand up, but I also put it in the box there, in the chat box.
Oh, good. Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
Well, thank you. Normally, I would send out or provide a sign-up sheet for our mailing list. If any of you would like to join our mailing list, if you haven't already, please send me an email at info@adkloon.org, and then we'll sign you up. And then also, we have lots of brochures and information available on our website for you to download if you go to the reports publications page. So.
Well, thank you, Nina, for the work that you do in protecting our wildlife, and thanks for the great presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Talk with you all.
So good to see everyone's faces.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Stay
You too.
safe.
Bye. Come out next summer. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, Heidi.
Oops.
Good night.